There are three things you never mess with if you want peace: someone's money, someone's family, and a boat owner's private dock. Because a dock isn't just boards over water, it's a timeline. It's where childhood happened, where grief got processed, where a family name quietly stayed alive. And that's why I'm telling you this from the deck of my 26-foot boat, a cold beer sweating in my hand, a 2,000-watt sound system bolted behind me. Because the people who tried to erase my dock are throwing a lakeside investor party, and I'm about to make sure their champagne comes with an aftertaste. I'm Mason Hale. I've lived beside Redwood Lake and Lakeshore Pines for 12 years. I'm a freelance structural engineer, which means I spend my life looking at what's real and what's pretending. And the most real thing I've ever inherited is the dock my parents built back in 1987, long before there was any HOA, long before anyone could hide behind bylaws and call it leadership. This lake is about 120 acres. Our community sits along the eastern shore. It's never been one of those glossy $1 million magazine lakes. It's been middle-class families, retirees, young professionals, people who wanted water access without selling their soul for it. I learned to swim here. My dad taught me to fish off that dock. My mom watched from the porch with lemonade waiting. And when my parents passed, they left me the house, the memories, and the legal paperwork. The filing cabinet my father kept like a vault. Deeds, surveys, clauses, the kind of documents that don't feel romantic until someone tries to steal your life with a clipboard. For years, the Lakeshore Pines Homeowners Association was background noise, common areas, the pool, the occasional event. Until 3 months ago when our annual election happened and most of us didn't pay attention. Because why would we? It had always been reasonable. And that's how Veronica Lang took the presidency. A former banking executive, newly widowed, well-funded, and carrying that specific hunger you see in people who miss having a room jump when they speak. Her first newsletter looked harmless: stricter lawn rules, paint approvals, the usual HOA clutter, until page 4, where a new section on waterfront structures quietly rewrote the world. According to these updated standards, every dock needed to meet new specifications designed so that every existing private dock became non-compliant overnight. 2 weeks later, a bright orange notice showed up on my door, bold letters screaming, "Non-compliant structure. 30 days to remove the dock or pay $100 a day in fines." And I felt anger flash, then forced myself to breathe, because I believed there had to be a mistake. My dock was grandfathered. It existed before the HOA. It was protected by the original deed and the HOA's own founding documents. So the next morning I dug through my father's files, found the grandfather clause in black and white, made copies, and went to the monthly HOA meeting expecting the adult version of reality: facts spoken, mistake corrected, handshake, done. But when I walked into the community center by the pool, I realized I'd entered a different era. Because Veronica Lang sat at the center of the board table in a throne-like chair that hadn't been there before, and beside her sat Colin Mercer, vice president, local realtor, smiling like paperwork was optional. When they opened the floor, I approached calmly, introduced myself, explained the notice, handed copies of the documents to each board member, and before I could finish the sentence about the grandfather clause, Veronica cut me off with a slow wave of her manicured hand, saying they were aware of the old rules, but the board had determined all waterfront structures must comply now for aesthetic and safety reasons. Then she called my dock an eyesore that hurt the community's image, and when I tried to explain it wasn't about aesthetics, it was about property rights, that my dock had passed county inspections and was structurally sound, Colin Mercer interrupted without even looking at my paperwork and claimed they had no record of any exemption for my particular structure. And just like that, Veronica leaned back and said the words that change a neighborhood: "The board's decision is final. You have 27 days." As the meeting ended, I noticed Veronica and Colin huddled with a sharply dressed man I didn't recognize, pointing toward the lake and talking like this wasn't enforcement, it was planning, and I walked home with my jaw tight and my instincts screaming that the dock wasn't the target. It was the first domino. That night I called my old friend Jordan Pierce, a real estate attorney. He listened, chuckled in disbelief, and said, "They can't do that. Grandfathered structures are protected by state law and by the HOA's own foundation." Then he warned me, "Keep your eyes open. HOAs don't target specific structures without a reason." The next morning, I went looking for the reason, and it surfaced faster than I expected. Veronica Lang had visible ties to Summit Crest Development, a company specializing in luxury waterfront projects. Their website even featured a glowing testimonial from Veronica dated before she became HOA president, and Colin Mercer was listed as a preferred realtor, which meant this wasn't a random crackdown. It was a partnership wearing a neighborhood mask. I walked around the lake to clear my head, and near a small public pier on the north shore I saw them. Veronica, Colin, the suited man from the meeting, plus two others carrying what looked like surveying equipment, scanning the shoreline like it was already sold. And I slowed down, pretended to check my phone, stayed close enough to hear. Veronica said private docks would be the first to go, that once they established a community marina, property values would rise at least 20%, that Summit Crest was interested in purchasing several lots for redevelopment once the neighborhood's profile was upgraded, and Colin nodded enthusiastically, adding that homeowners who couldn't afford the new association fees would sell, making way for the right kind of buyers, the ones who fit the new image. And the suited man smiled and said the lakefront gala next weekend would be perfect for introducing investors. Then he added the sentence that turned my anger into something sharp and focused. Make sure that eyesore dock is gone by then. It's directly in view of the event space. That was the truth, clean and ugly. This wasn't about safety. It was about forcing people out to make room for luxury redevelopment. The dock was just the beginning, and if they could push me, they could push anyone. Then the HOA email arrived announcing a special assessment, $2,500 per household, framed as infrastructure improvements. And I thought about my neighbors on fixed incomes, people who count dollars, people who plan retirement around stability, and I realized the plan wasn't just to remove docks. It was to squeeze the community until it reshaped itself. I called Eli Bennett, the maintenance manager, acting casual, and learned Veronica had commissioned architectural renderings for the marina weeks before she even ran for president. Plans including a members-only clubhouse, redesigned shoreline access, even a small boutique hotel, and the projected cost would triple our HOA fees over 3 years. Then Eli admitted there was a phase strategy. Phase 1 was targeting about 30 properties, mostly waterfront homes and older houses that didn't fit the aesthetic vision, and my dock was flagged as a first-phase problem. That night, I couldn't sleep, and around 2 a.m., I heard sounds coming from the lake, looked out and saw flashlights moving on my dock. I ran outside and found 2 men removing boards while Eli Bennett stood there directing them. He tried to call it a safety inspection, authorized by the board, but at 2 in the morning without notice it wasn't an inspection, it was trespassing and sabotage. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Told them they had 30 seconds to get off my property before I called the sheriff, and as the workers hurried away, Eli lowered his voice and admitted Veronica ordered them to find or create structural weaknesses that could be documented, because he had a family to feed and couldn't lose the job. When they left, I saw what they'd done: loosened boards, removed brackets, nothing catastrophic yet, but deliberate damage disguised as procedure, and I knew the polite phase was over. The next day, I met Jordan Pierce at Riverside Tap and Grill, showed him the footage and photos, and he said this wasn't HOA overreach anymore. It was coordinated harassment and property damage. He drafted a cease and desist letter, told me to send it certified, then leaned in with that lawyer calm and said, "They'll keep going anyway, so we need leverage." And he introduced me to Dr. Sienna Cross, an environmental law professor and neighbor who had already clashed with Veronica over protected trees. Sienna opened her laptop and gave me the lifeline I didn't know existed. Most of Redwood Lake fell under county jurisdiction, not HOA authority, and the shoreline plan for the gala was designated public recreational space, which meant they couldn't legally stop us from being on the water, and any major shoreline alteration like a private marina required environmental impact studies and public hearings. Studies and hearings that hadn't happened. And suddenly, the lake didn't feel like scenery anymore. It felt like a courtroom with a horizon. That evening, Sienna hosted a quiet meeting at her home, and a dozen residents showed up. People dismissed at meetings, people targeted for minor violations, people scared of losing the place they'd built their lives in. We laid county maps on the table, old development plans from 1976, and the oldest map showed the gala shoreline was community access, public use in perpetuity. A county clerk named Grace Lynn confirmed there were no filings for a marina. An IT security guy named Marcus Reed offered discreet cameras around the lake perimeter. A retired Navy neighbor named Caleb Warren offered marine coordination, and a journalist named Dylan Shore confirmed Summit Crest's pattern across counties. Infiltrate HOAs, weaponize compliance, force turnover, call it revitalization. We named it Operation Tidal Break, and we prepared like a small community running a rescue mission, secure messaging, code names, rehearsals, permits for a water safety demonstration, timed exactly with the gala, and we reinforced my dock with marine-grade hardware so it could survive not just sabotage, but lies. The morning of the gala, the weather was perfect. White tints rose across the water, floral centerpieces, a string quartet, champagne, investors arriving like they were buying a dream. And through binoculars, I watched Veronica pointing at my dock repeatedly. Furious, it was still standing. Then at exactly 4 p.m., she took the stage to welcome future residents and sell them Lakeshore Pines 2.0, luxury amenities, exclusive access, private marina, and that was our cue. Boats emerged from different points of the lake. We formed a semicircle just beyond the buoy line, separating private shoreline from public water. We unfurled a banner reading Protect Redwood Lake, public waters, public rights, and I raised the microphone and pressed the button. My voice cut across the water, introduced myself, explained the plan they hadn't been told, inflated HOA fees to force out residents, selective enforcement, illegal removal of protected structures like my family's dock, and the shoreline reacted instantly. Chairs turned, security panicked, Veronica froze mid-sentence, and neighbors began stepping onto decks and lawns like the community itself had woken up. An elderly couple unfurled a bedsheet banner. Kids held handmade signs, and from the North Cove came kayaks led by Marion Holt, a 72-year-old retired teacher, smiling like she'd waited her whole life to paddle into a moment that mattered. The quartet stopped playing, investors whispered, phones came out, and when Commissioner Alana Brooks arrived and stepped onto the lawn, applause erupted, because power hates witnesses. Then the dam broke. Eli Bennett confirmed publicly he was ordered to damage my dock. Other workers backed him up, and Veronica, furious, grabbed the microphone and threatened me, promising bankruptcy, fines, removal. And she didn't realize she was broadcasting intimidation in front of a county official. I played the final recording, Veronica instructing sabotage, and I watched investors' faces change, watched people quietly stand and leave, because nobody wants to invest in a vision built on property destruction. Then the twist hit. Colin Mercer walked onto the stage, voice tight, and admitted the board never properly voted on many changes. Minutes were altered, documents were deliberately removed, and Veronica wasn't truthful even with her own board. Right there on the lawn, the gala turned into an impromptu community meeting. Residents shared stories of intimidation and selective enforcement. Bylaws were read aloud. A motion for a special election was raised, and the message was crystal clear when nearly every hand went up against Veronica. Even Colin voted against her. And Commissioner Brooks announced a county investigation into the marina plan and HOA finances. Veronica Lang left alone, her party shattered, her investors gone, her authority collapsing in public. A month later, we held a legitimate election with record turnout. Sienna Cross became HOA president. The grandfather clause was reinstated and strengthened. My dock was formally recognized as compliant. HOA funds repaired the damage from the unauthorized inspection, and Veronica sold her house and vanished. Later evidence showed she'd been receiving consulting fees from Summit Crest, a conflict of interest with legal consequences. Colin stayed, not as a leader, but as a man trying to repair what he helped damage, quietly helping neighbors, organizing community programs, showing up in ways that didn't ask for applause, and the community healed, not perfectly, but honestly. Today, when I sit on my dock at sunset and watch the lake settle into silence, I understand the real victory wasn't just keeping wood and bolts. It was reclaiming the idea that a neighborhood isn't for sale, that public water is public right, that memories built by ordinary families are not raw material for someone else's profit. And here's the question I'll leave you with. When rules are weaponized, when greed hides behind progress, when sabotage is dressed up as inspection, is it wrong to crash the party to expose the truth? Or is that exactly what justice looks like when silence becomes complicity?